I thought I was attending only my son's wedding, smiling, taking pictures, trying not to cry. Then my grandson tugged on my hand and whispered, "Grandma, look under the table." At first, I laughed, but the moment I bent down, my heart stopped. I was not prepared for what I saw. Before I tell you what was under that table, take a second to like this video and subscribe if you believe family moments like this matter. Trust me, you'll want to stay until the end. I thought I understood what weddings were supposed to feel like. I had lived long enough to know the rhythm of them. The nervous laughter before the ceremony, the quiet tears during the vows, the polite applause, the clinking glasses, the way everyone pretended not to notice the cracks in the family that had taken decades to form. This was my son's second wedding. That alone carried weight. I stood near the back of the reception hall, fingers wrapped tightly around the edge of a white linen tablecloth, watching people mingle under soft golden lights. Everything looked perfect in the way perfection always does from a distance. The flowers were arranged just right. The music was gentle, familiar, safe. Even the laughter sounded rehearsed. I told myself I was happy. I told myself that this was what moving on looked like. My son stood across the room, tall and handsome in his suit, smiling in that careful way he'd learned over the years. Not the smile he wore as a boy, not the reckless grin he had when he first fell in love. This one was measured, controlled, the smile of a man who had been hurt and learned how to survive it. Beside him stood his bride. She was kind, thoughtful, good with my grandson. Everyone said she was perfect for him, which I had learned was what people say when they hope something will work rather than know it will. I had shaken her hand earlier, hugged her politely, whispered congratulations I wasn't sure I fully believed yet. Not because I didn't want happiness for my son, but because happiness after loss always feels fragile, like glass already cracked before it's lifted. I took a slow breath and reminded myself to stay present. Then I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Not hard, not urgent, just enough. I looked down. My grandson stood beside me, his little fingers wrapped around my wrist. He was 7 years old. Too young to understand weddings the way adults pretend to, but old enough to notice things no one else does. His hair was neatly combed, though a few strands had already escaped. His tie sat crooked because he hated the way it felt around his neck. He didn't look excited. He didn't look bored. He looked serious. That alone made my chest tighten. "Yes, sweetheart," I asked, bending slightly so I could hear him over the music. He leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Can you look under the table?" I smiled automatically, the way adults do when children say strange things. "Under the table?" I repeated softly. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tightened his grip on my wrist and pulled just a little, his eyes locking onto mine. "Please," he said, "you have to look." There was something in his voice that made the noise of the room fade. Not fear, not playfulness. Urgency. I straightened slightly and glanced around, expecting someone to be watching us, laughing, waiting for a joke to land. But no one was paying attention. Everyone was too busy with champagne glasses and small talk, and pretending this was just another happy ending. I laughed gently, trying to keep things light. "Is this a game?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." One word. Firm. Certain. I hesitated. In my 72 years, I had learned that children rarely ask for nothing. They don't understand how to mask emotions the way adults do. When something feels wrong or important, they say it plainly. "Okay," I said finally, lowering my voice. "Which table?" He didn't point. He just guided me. We moved slowly through the reception hall, weaving between chairs and guests. No one noticed us. Or if they did, they smiled politely and looked away. A grandmother and her grandson wandering during a wedding was hardly unusual. We stopped near the head table. The table where my son and his bride sat moments earlier, now temporarily empty, while they greeted guests and posed for photographs. My grandson stopped. "This one," he whispered. I looked at the table. Nothing stood out. White tablecloth draped neatly to the floor. Floral centerpiece placed perfectly in the center. Plates and glasses arranged with precision. Everything looked exactly as it should. I crouched slightly, lifting the edge of the cloth just enough to peek underneath, and then I froze. Because under that table, hidden from everyone else, was something I never expected to see at my son's wedding. Something that instantly pulled me backward in time. Something that made my throat close and my hands begin to shake. My grandson watched my face carefully. "You see it," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. I couldn't speak. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was looking at, trying to understand how it got there, trying to understand why a 7-year-old boy had noticed it when no one else had. "Who showed you this?" I finally asked, my voice barely steady. "No one," he said. "I found it." I looked at him again, really looked at him. And in that moment, I realized something that would change everything about the day. This was an accident. And this wedding, this carefully planned, picture-perfect moment, was about to reveal a truth that had been buried for years. A truth my son didn't know was waiting beneath his feet. I crouched there longer than I should have, long enough that my knees started to ache, long enough that the music shifted from a soft instrumental to a familiar love song everyone seemed to know the words to, long enough that I forgot, for just a moment, where I was, because under that table was a pair of tiny brown shoes, scuffed at the toes, laces loosely tied, shoes I recognized instantly, even after all these years. They were not my grandson's. They were my son's. My heart thudded so hard against my ribs, I was afraid someone might hear it. I slowly lifted my eyes, tracing upward from the shoes to the small legs tucked awkwardly beneath the table, knees pulled to the chest. A child sat there. Not just any child. A little boy, no older than 5, clutching something to his chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. A stuffed bear. One I had sewn myself decades ago, my fingers aching late into the night while my son slept in the next room. I had made it from an old flannel shirt his father used to wear before the accident. I remembered every crooked stitch, every imperfect seam. I had not seen that bear in over 30 years. My breath caught in my throat. This made no sense. My grandson leaned closer, his voice calm in a way only children can manage when they think they understand something adults don't. "He's been there the whole time," he whispered. I blinked, my vision blurring. "What?" I managed. "The boy," he said softly. He was there before the music started, before everyone sat down. I shook my head slowly, pressing one hand against the floor to steady myself. "That's not possible," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. The little boy under the table looked up at me and smiled. It was my son's smile, not the careful one he wore now, not the guarded one I'd grown used to seeing. This was the unfiltered smile of a child who still believed the world was safe. The smile of the boy who used to run barefoot through the backyard, who scraped his knees and cried until I kissed him better, who used to hide under the dining table during thunderstorms because he was afraid of the noise. I swallowed hard. "Grandma?" the boy asked. My chest tightened so sharply it felt like something was tearing. I couldn't answer, because the voice was wrong. Too young, too small, and yet unmistakable. I slowly stood, my movement stiff, my legs trembling as I backed away from the tablecloth. I straightened the fabric instinctively, smoothing it down as if that could erase what I had just seen. When I looked again, the table was empty. No shoes, no child, just shadows and white linen and polished wood floors. I pressed a hand to my mouth. My grandson looked up at me, his eyes searching my face. "You saw him too," he said. It wasn't excitement in his voice. It was relief. I knelt in front of him, gripping his small shoulders gently. "What did you see?" I asked carefully. Tell me exactly. He hesitated, glancing around again, lowering his voice. He was scared, he said. He was holding a bear. He said he didn't know if Dad was okay. My stomach dropped. Did he say anything else? I asked. My grandson nodded. He said he wanted to make sure Dad didn't forget him. The room suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too full of people who had no idea what was unfolding beneath their celebration. I pulled my grandson into my arms, holding him tighter than I meant to. Thank you for telling me. I whispered into his hair. You did the right thing. He relaxed slightly against me, like he'd been carrying a weight too heavy for his small frame. Are you going to tell Dad? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Because how do you tell a grown man that the child he used to be showed up at his own wedding? How do you explain that grief doesn't disappear? It just waits quietly until it's invited to speak. I stood and took my grandson's hand, guiding him toward a quieter corner of the reception hall. The music swelled as people applauded. The bride and groom were returning to the head table. My son walked past us, laughing, his arm around his new wife. He looked happy, truly happy, and I realized something that made my chest ache in a different way. He didn't look complete. I remembered another wedding. Years ago, a different hall, different flowers, different version of my son. He had been younger then, nervous, smiling too much. His first wife stood beside him, radiant and trembling, her hand gripping his like she was afraid to let go. I remembered the way he had looked at her, like she was the only anchor keeping him from floating away. And I remembered the phone call, the hospital, the way the world narrowed to a single sound, the beeping of machines and the echo of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I remembered holding my son's face as he cried like a child, sobbing into my shoulder while I whispered things no parent should ever have to say. She's gone. You have to breathe. I'm here. After that, he changed. Grief carved something out of him, something he never fully replaced. He became careful, quiet, strong in a way that came from endurance, not joy. And now, here he was again, starting over, building something new. But the child under the table, the one clutching the bear, had not been invited. My grandson squeezed my hand. He doesn't want to be alone, he said simply. I closed my eyes. I knew then what I had to do. Later that evening, after the speeches and the dancing and the cake cutting, I found my son standing alone near the edge of the room. His jacket was off, tie loosened, his smile softer now that the formalities were over. Mom, he said when he saw me, you okay? I studied his face, the lines, the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow of exhaustion beneath them. Can we talk? I asked. He nodded, glancing back toward his wife. Sure, everything all right. I gestured toward the hallway. We stepped away from the noise, the door closing behind us, muffling the music. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. What's wrong? He asked gently. I took a breath. Do you remember the bear? I asked. His brow furrowed. What bear? The one I made you, I said, from your father's old shirt. His expression shifted. I haven't thought about that in years, he said slowly. I lost it when I was a kid. I nodded. I know. He watched me carefully now. Why? I swallowed. Because your son saw it tonight, I said, under the table. He laughed lightly, shaking his head. Mom. I saw it too, I said firmly. Silence fell between us. His smile faded. That's not funny, he said. I'm not joking, I replied. There was a little boy under the table, holding that bear. He looked just like you. His breath caught. What are you saying? I stepped closer. I think a part of you never left that day, I said softly. And tonight he wanted to be seen. My son looked away, his jaw tightening. This is supposed to be a happy day, he said. I can't. I know, I said quickly. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I just don't want you to forget him. He closed his eyes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then his shoulders sagged. I was so scared back then, he said quietly. I didn't know how to be both a husband and a father without her. I reached out, placing my hand over his. You don't have to carry that alone anymore, I said. He exhaled shakily. When you were a child, I continued, you hid under tables when you were afraid. You thought if you stayed quiet enough, nothing bad could find you. He let out a soft, broken laugh. I didn't I? Yes, I said. And tonight, that little boy came to see if you were okay. My son wiped his eyes quickly, straightening. I don't want to ruin this, he said. You won't, I said. Acknowledging him won't take anything away. It will only make room for more. After a moment, he nodded. Thank you, he said, for telling me. When we returned to the reception, my grandson ran up to us. Did you tell him? He asked. My son crouched down, pulling him into a hug. Yes, he said quietly. I did. My grandson smiled, relief spreading across his face. He's gone now, he said. He said, thank you. I felt tears slip down my cheeks as the music swelled again, the room glowing with laughter and light. This wedding was not just an ending, it was a reckoning, and part one of a story that had waited decades to be told. The wedding ended the way weddings usually do. People hugged. Promises were repeated. Leftover cake was wrapped carefully in foil, like it might still matter tomorrow. Guests drifted into the parking lot under a sky that felt strangely quiet after so much noise. But something had shifted. I could feel in my bones. My son walked differently now, slower, like someone who had opened a door he didn't know existed, and was still adjusting to the light pouring through it. His wife noticed, too. I saw her glance at him with concern more than once, her hand brushing his arm gently, silently asking a question he wasn't ready to answer yet. My grandson stayed close to me, closer than usual. He didn't chatter the way children often do after long events. He didn't complain about being tired. He just held my hand and watched the adults with an expression far older than his years. On the drive home, the night stretched long and dark, headlights cutting through the quiet. My son drove. His wife slept softly in the passenger seat. My grandson leaned against a window in the back, humming to himself. I watched my son through the rearview mirror. His eyes were wet. He caught me looking and quickly looked back at the road. I didn't know he was still there, he said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. I knew who he meant. I think you did, I replied gently. You just didn't know how to listen. He nodded slowly. I built a whole life on top of that pain, he said. Work, responsibility, being strong for everyone else. That's what you thought you had to do, I said. And now, he asked. I didn't answer, because now was still forming. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone in the guest room, the moonlight spilling across the floor. I hadn't slept properly in days. My mind kept replaying the image of that little boy under the table, clutching the bear like it was a lifeline. I realized something unsettling. That child hadn't been asking for comfort. He had been asking for acknowledgement. Grief doesn't disappear when it's ignored. It waits, patient, persistent. It finds ways to surface when you least expect it, at weddings, at birthdays, in quiet moments when joy feels just a little too heavy. The next morning, my grandson climbed into my lap while I drank my coffee. Is Dad sad? He asked. Yes, I said honestly, but that doesn't mean he's unhappy. He considered that. He told the little boy he was okay. My grandson said. I stilled. He talked to him? I asked. He nodded. Last night, in his room, he sat on the floor, like I do sometimes. He said out loud. I felt my throat tighten. What did he say? I asked. My grandson smiled softly. He said, You don't have to hide anymore. I closed my eyes. That afternoon, my son asked if we could take a walk. Just the two of us. We walked along a quiet path near the house, leaves crunching beneath our feet. The air smelled like fall. Honest. Clean. I never told anyone this, he said suddenly. Not even you. I waited. After the accident, he continued, I used to dream that I was small again, that I was hiding, watching everything happen, but unable to stop it. I stopped walking. I thought if I grew up fast enough, if I became strong enough, I could outrun that kid. He looked at me then, but he kept growing too. I reached for his hand. You don't outrun grief, I said. You walk with it until it learns how to walk beside you instead of behind you. He nodded. I don't want to lose this marriage, he said quietly. I don't want to bring old ghosts into something new. They're not ghosts, I said. They're parts of you that never got a voice. That night, he told his wife everything. I wasn't there for conversation, but I saw the aftermath, the way she held him afterward, the way she didn't pull away, the way she listened without trying to fix anything. That mattered more than words. Over the next weeks, changes appeared slowly. My son laughed more freely. Not louder, freer. He cried once, unexpectedly, during a movie and didn't apologize for it. He took my grandson fishing and told him stories about when he was a kid, stories he had buried for years. One evening, I noticed something on the bookshelf. The bear, cleaned, repaired, sitting quietly among framed photos. You found it, I said. He nodded. I asked around. Turns out it was packed away in a box after the move all those years ago. I guess I just wasn't ready. And now, I asked. He smiled. Now it doesn't have to hide. My grandson noticed it too. He's not scared anymore, he said. Who? I asked, though I knew. The boy, he replied. I watched my son kneel beside his child, explaining something gently, something honest. Not everything, but enough. And I understood then what that moment under the table had really been. Not a haunting, not a mystery, a reunion. A reminder that healing doesn't erase the past. It integrates it. That love doesn't replace loss. It expands to hold it. And that sometimes the smallest voices are the ones brave enough to tell us where to look. There's a strange quiet that settles after a wedding. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that feels earned. It is a quiet that comes after a storm you didn't realize you were standing in until the clouds were already breaking apart. The house felt like that quiet. 4 weeks after the wedding, life moved forward the way it always does. Laundry cycles, school mornings, grocery lists taped to the refrigerator. From the outside, my son's life looked whole, stable, even joyful. If you didn't know where to look, you would never guess that something old and unresolved had begun to stir beneath the surface. But I knew, and my grandson knew. Children notice the shifts adults pretend don't exist. The first sign came one evening when my son came home from work later than usual. He didn't announce himself the way he normally did. No cheerful greeting. No exaggerated sigh as he kicked off his shoes. He just stood in the doorway longer than necessary, his briefcase hanging from his hand like it weighed more than it should. His wife looked up from the kitchen. "Hey," she said softly, "you okay?" He nodded, but the nod came too fast. "I'm fine," he said, "just tired." She studied him for a moment, then nodded back, letting it go. That was new. In his first marriage, tiredness had been an excuse, a shield, a reason to avoid conversations he didn't know how to finish. But now, tiredness was simply what it was, a state of being, not a barricade. He set his briefcase down and reached for my grandson, lifting him easily into his arms. "Hey, buddy," he said. "How was school?" My grandson wrapped his arms around his father's neck and rested his head there longer than usual. "Good," he said. "We learned about families." My son smiled faintly. "That's so." My grandson nodded. They said families can look different, but they still love each other. My son closed his eyes for just a second. That night, I found him sitting alone in the living room long after everyone else had gone to bed. The television was off. The lights were low. The bear sat on the coffee table between his hands. He didn't look up when I entered. I don't remember when it stopped hurting, he said quietly. I sat beside him. I don't think it ever stopped, I replied. I think you just got better at not listening to it. He traced a finger along the bear's worn stitching. I thought getting married again meant I had moved on, he said. I thought that meant I had healed. And now, I asked, and now I feel like I skipped something, he admitted. Like I built a house without checking the foundation. I nodded. Foundations matter, I said, but they can be reinforced. He looked at me then. What if it's too late, he asked. It isn't, I said. It just feels that way because you're finally standing where it started. Over the following months, my son began to change in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He started telling stories. Not the polished ones. Not the funny ones he had rehearsed for years. He told my grandson about the time he got lost at the county fair and cried until a stranger helped him find me. He talked about his fear of thunderstorms, about how he used to sleep with the hall light on long after other kids his age had stopped. My grandson listened like these stories were treasures, because to him they were. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the backyard. Dad, my grandson asked, "Were you scared when Mom died?" The word hung in the air. My son didn't correct him, didn't deflect, didn't soften it. Yes, he said simply. I was very scared. What were you scared of? My grandson asked. My son took a breath. That I wouldn't remember her right, he said. That I wouldn't be enough for you. That if I stopped hurting, it would mean she didn't matter anymore. My grandson considered this. But hurting doesn't mean loving, he said slowly. Loving is remembering. I felt tears sting my eyes where I stood unseen. Children don't intellectualize grief. They embody it. They feel it without layering shame or expectations on top. And sometimes they offer truths adults spend decades avoiding. That conversation changed something. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But like water wearing down stone, it softened places in my son that had been rigid for years. Still, not everything healed easily. The dreams returned. My son didn't tell me at first. I noticed the signs instead. The way he would wake before dawn, already dressed, sitting at the kitchen table staring into nothing. The way he would flinch at sudden noises. The way he sometimes avoided certain rooms in the house without realizing why. One night, he finally admitted it. He's back in my dreams, he said. The boy. I asked. He nodded. He doesn't hide anymore, he said. But he doesn't speak either. He just looks at me like he's waiting. For what? I asked. I don't know, he admitted. Maybe for me to say something I never said. I thought about that. Grief freezes moments. I said slowly. Sometimes the work isn't about reliving them. Sometimes it's about finishing them. He leaned back in his chair. I never said goodbye, he whispered. There it was. The thing that had been circling for decades. When his first wife died, the hospital staff had rushed him out of the room. Too young, too distraught, too many decisions being made too fast. He had been carried forward by logistics before he could process reality. He never said goodbye. That kind of unfinished moment doesn't fade. It waits. That week, he did something unexpected. He took a day off work. No explanation. No excuse. He simply told his boss he needed the day. He drove alone. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. When he came back that evening, his eyes were red but steady. He placed something gently on the mantel, a framed photograph of his first wife, smiling the way she used to before the illness took hold. His current wife noticed immediately. She didn't stiffen. She didn't look away. She stepped closer and touched the frame. She was beautiful, she said. Yes, he replied. She was. They stood there together in silence. Later that night, my son came to me. I went to the cemetery, he said. I nodded. I talked out loud, he continued. I told her about our son, about my new marriage, about the boy I used to be. He swallowed. I told her I was sorry I didn't say goodbye. I reached for his hand. What did you feel? I asked. Lighter, he said. Not free, but lighter. That mattered. Healing is not erasure. It is integration. Meanwhile, my grandson began asking questions that startled everyone. Can people love more than one person forever? He asked one night. Yes, I said. Love doesn't get used up. Then why do people act like it does? He asked. I didn't have an easy answer. Because adults are taught to compartmentalize, to rank, to replace. Children simply expand. One evening, during a family dinner, my grandson did something that made the room go quiet. He stood up on his chair and cleared his throat dramatically. I have an announcement, he said. We all looked at him. I think Dad is being brave, he said. My son blinked. Why is that, buddy? He asked. Because he stopped hiding, my grandson said. No one laughed. No one dismissed it. Because it was true. That night, my son slept through until morning for the first time in weeks. The dream softened after that. Not gone, but quieter, less insistent. And then came the moment that none of us expected. It happened during an ordinary afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The kind of rain that feels more like memory than weather. My grandson sat on the floor, drawing quietly. My son was nearby, sorting through an old box he had unearthed from the garage. He paused suddenly. What's this? He asked. I looked. It was a letter, unopened, dated the week before his first wife passed away. His hands trembled as he opened it. He read silently at first, then aloud. She had written about fear, about love, about trusting him to keep living even when she couldn't, about not wanting him to shrink himself into silence for her sake. When he finished, he covered his face with his hands. I thought I was honoring her by holding on to the pain, he said. And now, I asked, and now I think she wanted me to let it change me, he said. Not cage me. My grandson looked up from his drawing. I draw better when I don't hold the crayon too tight, he said matter-of-factly. We all laughed through tears. That was the moment when grief stopped being something my son carried alone. It became something we held together. And for the first time since that wedding day, I understood why my grandson had been the one to notice what was under the table. He wasn't afraid of what adults call the past. He wasn't afraid of what we hide. He simply knew that what is unseen still takes up space. And sometimes love asks us to look down, not to collapse, but to lift what we have carried long enough. There's a moment in every family when the past stops being a story and starts being a presence. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. For us, that moment came quietly, on a Sunday afternoon that looked like nothing special from the outside. The house smelled like coffee and dust. Old boxes had stacked near the hallway, their cardboard edges softened by time. My son had decided, on a sudden impulse, to clean out the attic, not because anyone asked him to, not because it needed to be done, but because something inside him said it was time. My grandson sat cross-legged on the floor, supervising the way children do, offering commentary and opinions without ever touching the work itself. His stepmother moved between rooms, giving us space but staying close enough to be present. I watched my son climb the attic ladder slowly, carefully, like he was entering a place he hadn't visited in years. And in truth, he hadn't. The attic had become a storage unit for unfinished chapters. Wedding gifts from a first marriage. Baby clothes he couldn't bring himself to give away. Objects that held memory, without asking permission. He emerged with the first box and set it down gently, like it might break. What's in there? My grandson asked. My son hesitated. Pieces of my life. He said honestly. My grandson nodded as if that made perfect sense. As the boxes opened, time folded in on itself. There were photographs, creased at the edges, colors fading. There were handwritten notes, grocery lists from another decade, birthday cards with inside jokes no one remembered anymore. There was grief in those boxes, yes, But there was also proof of love that had once been whole and unafraid. My son picked up a small hospital bracelet. He stared at it for a long time. "That's yours," I said softly. "From when you were born." He turned it over in his hands. "I don't remember feeling safe back then," he said. "I don't remember not being afraid." I shook my head gently. "You were safe," I said. "You just don't remember it because fear came later and rewrote the memory." He absorbed that quietly. My grandson reached out and touched the bracelet. "So you were little too," he said. My son smiled. "Yes," he said, "very little." That afternoon stretched on, box after box, memory after memory. Sometimes my son laughed. Sometimes he fell silent. Sometimes he needed to step away. And every time he did, his wife was there, not hovering, not rescuing, just present. Later, when the house grew quieter, she finally spoke. "I want to understand," she said, "not compete with it, not erase it. I just want to know where you've been." My son looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. That night, they talked longer than they ever had before. Not about logistics, not about schedules or plans. About fear, about jealousy she didn't want to admit she felt. About guilt he didn't know how to release. About the invisible comparisons that haunted both of them. And something shifted, not perfectly, not magically, but honestly. Over the next weeks, the change showed itself in unexpected ways. My son began to include his wife in memories he had always kept sealed off. He spoke her name alongside the past without flinching. He let his present coexist with what came before. And in doing so, he showed my grandson something powerful. That love is not fragile. That it does not shatter when acknowledged. One evening, my grandson asked a question that made everyone pause. "If I have kids one day," he said, "will they feel scared too?" The room went quiet. My son knelt in front of him. "They might feel scared sometimes," he said, "but they won't feel alone." "Why not?" my grandson asked. "Because I'll teach you how to talk about it," my son replied. "And you'll teach them." I felt tears well up then, not from sadness, but from recognition. This was how cycles end, not with denial, but with language. Later that month, something unexpected happened. The anniversary of my son's first wife's passing arrived quietly. No one marked it on the calendar. No reminders chimed. But grief remembers dates even when people try not to. This time, my son didn't withdraw. He didn't pretend. He gathered us together. "I want to do something different," he said. We drove to the park where he used to take walks with her. The trees were taller now. The benches replaced. Time had moved on without asking permission. He stood there, holding his wife's hand, my grandson on the other side. "This is part of our family," he said. "Not all of it, but part." My grandson placed a small drawing at the base of the tree. It showed a family holding hands. All of them. That night, my son slept peacefully. And so did I, because I realized then that what my grandson had seen under that table wasn't just a child. It was a future asking not to inherit silence. And we had answered. There is a moment when grief stops asking questions, not because it has been answered, but because it has been heard. I did not recognize that moment at first. It arrived quietly, disguised as an ordinary morning, the kind that doesn't announce itself as important. Sunlight spilled through the kitchen window. The coffee pot clicked off. The house breathed in that slow, settled way that only comes when no one is rushing. My grandson sat at the table, coloring. My son stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes that could have waited but didn't need to. His wife leaned against the counter, watching him with the kind of expression that only comes from understanding something without needing explained. And I realized then that the house felt different. Not happier, not lighter, more honest. Grief had not left us, but it no longer stood between us. It stood with us. Over the following months, life continued in the ordinary ways that never make it into stories. School projects, dentist appointments, forgotten lunches, Small arguments about bedtime. But threaded through all of it was something new. Language. My son spoke now when something hurt, instead of swallowing it. His wife asked questions instead of guessing. My grandson named his feelings without apology. One night, as I tucked him into bed while his parents were out, he asked me something I hadn't expected. "Grandma," he said, staring at the ceiling, "do people live inside us forever?" I considered my answer carefully. "They live in the parts they helped shape," I said, "and in the choices we make because of them." He nodded. "That boy under the table," he said. "He doesn't come anymore." I smiled gently. "Why do you think that is?" "Because Dad knows he's there," he replied. "You don't have to hide if someone remembers you." That was when I understood something I had missed before. Healing wasn't about removing the child under the table. It was about letting him stand up. The true test came later that year. A small thing, really. A school event. My grandson's class hosted a family day. Parents were invited. Grandparents, too. Photos would be taken. Names would be written on cards. Family trees drawn in crayon and glue. My son hesitated when the invitation came home. "Do I include?" he began. His wife finished the sentence for him. "All of it," she said, "in the way that feels true." So they did. At the event, my grandson proudly introduced everyone. "This is my dad," he said. "This is my mom," he added, squeezing his stepmother's hand. "And this," he said, pointing to a photo he'd taped onto his poster, "is the first mom who loved my dad." There was no confusion in his voice. No fear. Just fact. Some parents looked uncomfortable. Some smiled awkwardly. Some said nothing at all. But my son stood taller than I had ever seen him. Later that night, he said something that stayed with me. "I used to think protecting my child meant hiding my pain," he said. "Now I know it means showing him how to carry it." As time passed, the bear moved from shelf to shelf. Sometimes it sat in the living room. Sometimes in my grandson's room. Sometimes tucked away. It no longer mattered where it was. It was no longer an anchor. It was a reminder. Years later. Because life does what it does and time insists on moving. I watched my grandson stand a little taller than my shoulder, his voice deeper now, his questions more complex. He asked one day, "Do you ever stop missing people?" "No," I said honestly, "but missing changes shape." "How?" he asked. "It becomes gratitude," I replied, "if you let it." The final moment came unexpectedly. Another wedding. Not my son's this time. A cousin. Different hall. Different music. Same white tablecloths. I sat at a table near the back, watching families gather, watching children weave between chairs the way children always do. My grandson, older now, steady, sat beside me. He nudged my arm and smiled. "I remember that wedding," he said. "Which one?" I asked. "The one where I told you to look under the table." I laughed softly. "So do I." He glanced around the room, then leaned in. "You don't have to check this time," he said. "Why not?" I asked. "Because everyone's already standing," he replied. And I understood. Some stories begin under tables. Some begin in silence. And some begin the moment someone brave enough says, "Look here." That wedding was never about what was hidden. It was about what refused to stay unseen. It was about a child who noticed what adults were afraid to acknowledge. It was about a father who learned that strength doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from integration. It was about a family that chose to stop passing down silence and start passing down truth. That is what remained, and that is what became ours. That one quiet moment under the table turned an ordinary wedding into a memory I will carry for the rest of my life. It reminded me that love doesn't always stand at the altar. Sometimes it waits quietly, right beneath your feet. Thank you for watching, and I hope this story finds someone who needs it today.